Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every woman's life when the world seems to go quiet. Not in peace, but in pause. A moment where she finds herself standing alone, without the applause, without the affirmation, without a hand to hold. And in that moment, fear tries to speak. It whispers old lies in new voices. It says, "You are not enough. You need someone. You won't make it." But not all women shrink when fear speaks. So, chosen women step forward instead. They don't deny fear, they dissolve. They have discovered the secret that fear is not something you must conquer outside of you, but something you must deactivate within you. There is a moment, often invisible to the outside world, where a woman decides, without ceremony or applause, that she is no longer available for a life governed by survival mode reflexes. This moment is not loud, but it is seismic. It is the moment she chooses to recalibrate from the inside out. Inner recalibration is not a motivational slogan. It's not a temporary mindset hack. It is a full system reset that starts in the quietest place. Her awareness. You see, fear is not random. It is rehearsed. It is memorized. It is encoded into the body through repetition, past events, emotional imprints, unresolved memories that never found closure. These memories create a chemical environment in the body, and the body begins to crave that familiar emotional state, even if it's fear, worry, or self-doubt. That emotion becomes a baseline. The body starts to know it better than peace. But here's the truth. Just as the body memorized fear, it can also unlearn it. That's where recalibration begins. A chosen woman knows that changing her life doesn't start with changing her job, her location, her partner, or her wardrobe. It begins with the internal switchboard of her emotions and thoughts, that sacred place where the nervous system and subconscious meet. She starts by observing, without judgment. She pays attention to the emotional addictions that she used to call personality traits, the constant scanning for danger, the inner dialogue that says, "I can't do this," the anticipation of disappointment before anything has even happened. She realizes these aren't truths. They're just conditioned responses, neural loops created by repetition. Then comes the choice, the most radical thing she can do. She interrupts the loop. She sits in stillness even when it feels unnatural. She breathes slowly, deliberately, even when her body wants to rush. She places herself in the present moment because it is the only moment that holds power. She begins to direct her focus like a laser, not on the problems of the past or the projections of the future, but on the energy of possibility. Over time, the chemistry changes. The neurons that fired together in panic begin to quiet. New networks begin to form. She's no longer reinforcing the neural architecture of fear. Instead, she starts building a new circuit board, one wired for presence, trust, and emotional clarity. She reclaims her breath not as an afterthought, but as a tool. She uses it to regulate the space between thought and reaction. She starts creating a pause between the stimulus and her response. And in that pause, her power is reborn. And she doesn't just do this once. She practices it daily. Repeatedly, consistently, because the brain doesn't change with inspiration, it changes with repetition. Neuroplasticity requires devotion. And so she becomes the architect of her own inner environment. She becomes the one who decides what gets broadcast through her nervous system. She no longer waits for safety to appear outside of her. She begins to generate safety internally through new emotional set points that she chooses on purpose. Stillness instead of anxiety, curiosity instead of judgment, groundedness instead of chaos. The body begins to follow. The nervous system, once hypersensitive and reactive, begins to regulate. The vagus nerve strengthens. Heart rate variability improves. The immune system stabilizes. Hormones shift. Her biology becomes a reflection of her new internal programming. And then something strange and beautiful begins to happen. The outer world, once a mirror of her fear, starts to shift in response to her new signal. Because the universe doesn't respond to what we say we want. It responds to the vibrational signature we emit. And once she starts transmitting coherence instead of chaos, peace instead of panic, strength instead of scarcity, the world must echo that signal back to her. But the shift didn't start in the external world. It didn't come from a relationship or a bank account or an affirmation on a sticky note. It began in the unseen, in the lab of her consciousness, through the steady and disciplined practice of inner recalibration, through the decision to become sovereign over her own frequency, through the deep cellular level transformation that no one else could see, but that she could feel shaping her future from within. There is a profound awakening that occurs when a woman stops identifying herself by the story others wrote for her, the one etched into her name, her body, her resume, her scars. This awakening doesn't happen overnight. It is gradual, sometimes painful, like the shedding of old skin that has grown too tight, but it is necessary. Because no woman who lives trapped inside a version of herself defined only by the physical can ever fully access the dimensions of her power. The physical self, what the world sees, is only a sliver of the truth. The chosen woman begins to understand that what she once believed was her identity, her appearance, her past, her trauma, her achievements, her roles, was never the full picture. It was simply the costume she wore in the theater of survival. It was her armor. It was her default setting, constructed from inherited beliefs, early experiences, societal expectations, and repetitive thoughts that hardened into personality. But she is not the costume. She is the consciousness behind it, and when she dares to pull her identity out from under the weight of the physical, she touches something eternal. She meets herself not as a body, but as a frequency, not as a name, but as a presence, not as a story, but as a force. She begins to ask questions that don't exist on a checklist. Who am I beneath the noise? Who am I when no one is watching? When there's nothing to prove? When there's no mirror reflecting someone else's idea of beauty or worth or success? Who am I without my history holding me hostage? And in those questions, her new self begins to rise. She stops chasing validation from the outside because she realizes she was never created to be understood through the lens of other people's projections. The body changes. But the woman who knows who she is beyond all form becomes untouchable. She becomes familiar with her own energetic signature, not the vibrations of stress or fear or striving, but the hum of pure being. She meditates not just to relax, but to remember, to step outside of the illusion and reconnect with the deeper field of consciousness that holds all potential. She realizes she doesn't have to be who she was yesterday, that the brain isn't fixed, and neither is she. That every morning she wakes up, her cells are changing. Her thoughts are either reinforcing the old or sculpting the new. And in that truth, she finds freedom. She begins to visualize herself as the future version she's becoming. Not a fantasy, but a blueprint. She walks like her, speaks like her, breathes like her. She knows that if she can feel it in her nervous system, her brain will begin to hardwire that version as real. The subconscious doesn't know the difference between a memory and a deeply imagined future. So she chooses to make the future her dominant vibration, not the past. She reclaims herself from all the places she once left pieces, relationships, rejections, comparisons, expectations. She pulls her energy back like sacred threads, weaving herself whole again. Not because she wants to perform, but because she refuses to live in fragments. She no longer needs to look in the mirror to know who she is. Her sense of self no longer rises and falls with the curve of her hips, or the presence of makeup, or the shape of her voice. She's anchored deeper than that now. She is grounded in the invisible, in the unshakable knowing that she is a living signal of consciousness in motion. And this knowing begins to rewrite her behavior. She moves differently. She no longer needs to compete, compare, or conform. Her decisions become less about how they make her look, and more about how they align with who she's becoming. Her presence becomes a transmission. People feel her before she even speaks. Not because she's loud, but because she's aligned. Her nervous system stops being hijacked by other people's energy because she has claimed sovereignty over her own. She no longer asks, "Do they see me?" Instead, she asks, "Do I recognize me here?" She lives less and less in reaction to the world and more as the creator of her state. She becomes less performative and more authentic, less edited and more expanded. Because when identity transcends the physical, limitations lose their grip. Doubt has nowhere to root. Fear has no voice to echo through. She becomes the one who remembers who she is, even in the dark. Especially in the dark, because she no longer draws her power from what can be taken from her. She draws it from what was never separate to begin with. There is a shift that occurs when a woman begins to live beyond logic. not in rebellion against reason, but in alignment with something vaster. She stops waiting for life to prove itself to her through circumstances and starts tuning into the subtle intelligence beneath all matter. She stops relying solely on what she can see, touch, or control, and begins to walk with something unseen, but unmistakably real. She begins to walk with the quantum field. To the outside world, this doesn't look dramatic. But internally, it is a revolution, because to walk with the quantum field means to stop looking at life as a linear progression and start experiencing it as a web of infinite probabilities, all responding to the vibration of her inner state. She no longer sees herself as a passive participant in life. She becomes a co-creator, an emitter of frequency, a collaborator with the very fabric of reality. She understands that thought is not just mental activity. It is electromagnetic energy. That every time she focuses her attention, she's collapsing waves of possibility into form. She is no longer simply reacting to life. She is broadcasting instructions to the field. The quantum field does not respond to desperation. It does not understand fear-based projection or tightly gripped timelines. It responds to coherence, to clarity, to elevated emotion. To the woman who dares to feel the future before it arrives, and who holds that frequency long enough for the field to echo it back in tangible form, she begins to feel her way forward instead of analyzing every step. She develops a deep inner attunement, one that doesn't come from strategy, but from stillness, from listening, from sensing. She learns the language of energy, and it speaks to her in synchronicities, subtle nudges, unexpected opportunities, and moments of unexplainable knowing. She no longer calls these coincidences. She calls them alignment. And because of this alignment, she stops hustling to make things happen. Not because she becomes passive, but because she becomes powerful in a different way. She understands that matter-changing matter is slow, but energy-influencing matter? That is quantum. That is instantaneous. That is why her inner world matters more than her to-do list. She starts to trust the invisible, not in a vague, spiritual, bypassing kind of way, but in a deeply grounded, vibrationally disciplined way. She shows up to her meditation not to escape life, but to access the code behind it. She visualizes not to fantasize, but to command her brain and body into a new signature of being. She learns that if she can generate the emotion of her desired future now, her body will begin to believe that future is already real. Her heart becomes a magnet. Her breath becomes a portal. Her mind becomes a frequency generator, and the field listens. She begins to release the need to know how things will unfold, because she realizes that how belongs to the old paradigm of control. In the quantum, the how is none of her business. Her job is to become the version of herself who already has it. Her job is to tune her body and mind into the vibration of that reality, as if it were already hers, and then let go. She learns that walking with the quantum field means surrendering to intelligence beyond intellect. That she is not separate from the field, she is an extension of it. She doesn't need to beg the universe for miracles, remembering itself in human form. She is both the signal and the receiver, both the wave and the particle, both the prayer and the answer. So she walks, not just physically, but vibrationally. She walks through her days holding an energetic posture that is rooted not in what is, but in what can be. She lets go of timelines that were shaped by urgency. She trusts the pacing of resonance. She calibrates not to the noise of the world, but to the signal of the future she already feels whispering to her from within. And in this space, she no longer needs permission to believe. The results may not yet be visible, but the field doesn't require proof. It requires alignment. It responds not to appearance, but to essence. Not to effort alone, but to embodiment. Not to fear masked as control, but to intention bathed in coherence. She begins to feel it before she sees it. She begins to be it before she receives it. She begins to relate to the unseen as the architect of all that is seen. And so, her walk becomes a ritual. Her presence becomes a frequency. Her life becomes a conversation with the intelligence that surrounds her, informs her, and responds to the energy she chooses to emit with every breath, every thought. Every moment she dares to believe in the unseen is more real than what's in front of her. There is a kind of fear that doesn't scream. It whispers. It blends into the background noise of your life so well that you stop recognizing it as fear at all. It becomes familiar. wears different masks: hesitation, overthinking, avoidance, perfectionism, distraction. And when a woman lives long enough inside that loop, fear becomes indistinguishable from personality. She stops calling it fear. She calls it being a careful, being a realistic, being a not ready yet. But the chosen woman, she begins to see it for what it is. Not truth, not prophecy, not intuition, but a habit. Fear, when repeated enough, becomes a neurological pattern. The brain becomes hardwired to anticipate danger even when none exists. The nervous system memorizes the sensation of bracing. And the body, loyal and adaptive, starts releasing stress hormones even in the absence of threat because it no longer needs evidence. It only needs repetition. The body remembers. It remembers what it feels like to shrink, to second guess, to delay, to dread. And the more often it feels those things, the more it believes that this state of contraction is safety. But it's not safety, it's survival. There's a difference. And this is where the awakening begins. When she starts to recognize that fear is not just an emotion, but a state of being she's been conditioned to occupy. It's not her fault, but it is her responsibility to interrupt it. So she gets curious. She begins to study her own patterns, the way a scientist studies a phenomenon. She observes when her stomach tightens, when her chest closes, when her thoughts race ahead to the worst-case scenario before she's even taken the first step. She stops letting fear be the narrator. She becomes the observer, and in that observation she finds choice. Because the nervous system can be rewired. The brain is not fixed, it's plastic, malleable, a living map that responds to experience. And once she understands that fear is nothing more than a conditioned prediction, a loop her brain keeps running in the absence of new data, she begins the process of installing a new program. She doesn't do this with force. She does it with consistency. She starts small. She leans into micro moments of courage. She catches the thought before it becomes a story. She takes the breath before the panic rises. She says the thing even while her voice shakes. And when her body wants to retreat into the known, she pauses and reminds it that the known is not the same as the safe. That comfort zones are often just cages with velvet walls. She teaches her body something new. Because every time she chooses presence over panic, she's carving a new neural pathway. Every time she breathes through the discomfort instead of numbing it, she's laying down fresh synaptic connections. Every time she acts in alignment with her future, even when fear tells her to stay small, she's signaling to the brain, this is the new normal. Fear starts to lose its grip, not because it disappears, but because she stops reacting to it as truth. She learns to name it when it shows up, not to obey it, but to disarm it. She gives it breath, not power. She welcomes it to the table, but doesn't hand it the pen. She hears the voice of doubt, and for the first time, she doesn't take direction from it. She simply says, I see you, but I'm not living by your script anymore. And the repetition becomes a new ritual. Each time she meets fear and doesn't collapse, she creates a reference point for her nervous system. Each time she survives what her mind told her she couldn't handle, she rewrites the narrative. Each time she steps forward anyway, the body takes note. This isn't danger, it's just expansion. And slowly, the chemical addiction to fear begins to break. The cortisol doesn't spike so easily. The hypervigilance softens, the muscles unclench, the breath deepens, the body begins to trust her again. Not because the world changed, but because she did. She begins to understand that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the conscious interruption of its cycle. And that interruption, when repeated enough times, becomes a new habit, a new way of being. One no longer dictated by the past, but directed by intention. One that frees her from the reflex of retreat and reintroduces her to the strength she forgot she always carried. There comes a moment in the evolution of a woman when she realizes her emotions are not just fleeting visitors. They are power currents, energetic signatures, internal weather systems that shape her perception, her decisions, her frequency. And when she begins to understand this, she no longer treats them as wild forces that happen to her, but as signals she has the ability to meet, observe, and transform. She steps into a deeper truth: emotional sovereignty. Emotional sovereignty is not the denial of emotion. It is not suppression. It is not bypassing or pretending to be above the chaos. It is the opposite. It is radical ownership of the inner landscape. It is the choice to be the conscious conductor of emotional energy rather than its unconscious passenger. Most people never get there. Most people live in reaction. Something happens. They react, someone disapproves, they shrink. An old trigger resurfaces, they spiral. Their nervous system gets hijacked, and the story of the past gets replayed on loop. They don't feel emotion, they become it. They collapse into it. And then they wonder why their life never changes. But the chosen woman knows, if she is not the authority of her emotional state, she will forever be ruled by the conditions around her. So she begins the sacred practice of emotional mastery. She sits with herself, not just when it's pretty, not just when she's glowing and inspired, but when the discomfort rises, when the doubt creeps in, when the anger surfaces like fire in her chest. She doesn't run from it. She doesn't project it. She doesn't numb it. She meets it. Eyes open, breath steady, heart willing. She becomes the container, the witness, the calm within the storm. She asks questions, not to analyze, but to alchemize. Whose energy is this? Is this mine, or did I absorb it? Is this truth, or just habit? Is this a reflection of what's happening now, or a memory dressed in present tense? She gives herself permission to feel everything, but permission doesn't mean indulgence. It means presence, spaciousness. She lets emotion rise like a wave, and she learns how to ride it, not drown in it. She understands that every emotional reaction is a thread leading to something deeper, a belief, a memory, a part of her that was once unprotected. And instead of judging those places, she brings them home. This is the labor of sovereignty. It is not loud, but it is seismic. She learns to regulate without suppressing, to express without leaking, to hold herself without collapsing. Her emotional landscape becomes less like a battlefield and more like a sacred garden. She weeds what is outdated. She waters what is true. She gives light to what is growing and grace to what is healing. And as she deepens in this work, her nervous system becomes her ally. No longer on constant alert, no longer chasing safety outside of herself, no longer reacting to every comment, glance, or silence. She begins to cultivate internal safety, not as a reaction to danger, but as her baseline. Her resting frequency becomes steadiness. Her new default becomes grounded. And that groundedness creates space for her intuition to rise, clear, and uncluttered. She stops outsourcing her peace to circumstances. She doesn't need others to behave a certain way for her to feel stable. She doesn't need validation to feel worthy. She doesn't need agreement to trust her path, because she knows that her emotional energy is hers to direct. Not to deny, but to direct with precision, with clarity, with presence. And as she learns to anchor herself inward, she becomes unfuckwithable in the quietest, most sacred way. She no longer gives her power away to passing moods. She no longer needs the world to agree with her choices for her to feel good in them. She no longer believes that how she feels is dependent on how others treat her. She recognizes that her internal state is the epicenter of her reality, and so she protects it, cultivates it, and chooses it again and again. This doesn't make her emotionless. It makes her emotionally intelligent. It makes her magnetic. It makes her sovereign in a world that profits off disconnection and emotional volatility. She becomes the lighthouse, not the wave, the signal, not the noise, the one who can feel deeply without being derailed by the depth, the one who can hold heartbreak and still choose softness, the one who can feel fear and still move forward, the one who can rage without destroying, grieve without abandoning herself, rise without needing revenge, because her emotions are no longer her master. They are her messengers, her inner compass, her sacred data. And she learns how to hold space for them, listen to them, learn from them, and then lead herself beyond them. There comes a point in a woman's inner evolution when she can no longer look at her life, her relationships, her career, her daily interactions, and believe that they are random, disconnected events. She begins to see something deeper, something quieter, yet more exacting than any rulebook or tradition ever taught her, that the external is never just happening. It is reflecting. That life, in all its messy detail, is not separate from her. It is a projection of her most consistent inner frequencies, beliefs, expectations, and unconscious agreements. The chosen woman begins to walk through her world as if everything is a mirror, not as a metaphor, but as an energetic principle. She sees that the people she draws toward her are not here by accident. They are mirrors of some facet of her internal state. Some reflect her worth, others reflect her wounds, Some reflect her current frequency, others reflect her untapped potential. And when she becomes brave enough to stop reacting and start receiving these reflections, her life becomes a classroom, a sacred echo chamber, a dynamic field of feedback that constantly invites her deeper into alignment, truth, and clarity. When someone disrespects her boundaries, she no longer spirals into resentment. She asks herself, where have I been silent? Where have I not honored my own no with conviction? When a door closes, she no longer interprets it as rejection. She inquires, what vibration was I emitting? Was this aligned with my expansion? Or was I forcing a version of me I've already outgrown? When praise or abundance flows in, she doesn't just celebrate the event, she recognizes it as a mirror of the energetic shift she's committed to internally, the new identity she's begun to embody. This awareness transforms the mundane into the mystical. The grocery store becomes a portal. A passing conversation becomes insight. A delayed email becomes an invitation to surrender control. She stops chasing signs from the universe and begins to realize everything is a sign. Every result is a report card of alignment. Every trigger is a flashlight pointing toward a place where her energy still clings to the old. Every moment becomes part of the mirror, reflecting not just where she's been, but what she's believing, allowing, and emitting now. And this understanding, though liberating, demands radical responsibility, because the mirror doesn't lie. It doesn't bend to comfort her ego or soothe her illusions. It shows her the truth, not to punish, but to awaken. It doesn't respond to who she wants to be. It responds to who she actually is, beneath the declarations and intentions. It doesn't reflect the affirmations she says once a week. It reflects the subconscious programming she rehearses every time she doubts herself, every time she tolerates misalignment, every time she chooses fear disguised as practicality. This is where true power begins, not in controlling the external, but in controlling the signal she sends into it. She realizes that her environment, whether expansive or restrictive, is not the source of her reality, but the echo of her energy. That the world doesn't change when she forces it to. It changes when she changes the self the world is responding to. She stops trying to manipulate outcomes and starts refining her frequency. She lets go of blame, of projection, of needing others to shift before she can feel safe. She knows the work is internal always, and the mirror will catch up. She begins to walk through her day like a conscious creator inside a living feedback loop. Her attention sharpens. Her self-awareness deepens. She notices the subtle emotional cues, the contractions in her body, the thoughts that repeat like background noise. She knows that each one is a vote toward the next version of her life, that each moment is a casting call for who and what the mirror will reflect back to her next. And as she learns to tend to her inner terrain, the reflections shift. The people she attracts shift. The way others treat her shifts, not because she demanded it, but because she stopped vibrating at the level where mistreatment, misalignment, and mediocrity could find her. She becomes unavailable for anything that does not mirror her highest resonance. Even chaos becomes data. Even stillness becomes dialogue. She doesn't flinch when old patterns reappear. She observes them as remnants of a frequency she no longer fuels. She doesn't beg the mirror to change. She adjusts her internal lens. She doesn't demand a new picture. She changes the light within herself. She doesn't wait for the reflection to validate her healing. She becomes the source of it. And she realizes something few ever do. The outer world is never ahead of the inner one. The mirror doesn't lie, but it doesn't lead either. It follows. It reflects. It responds. And the moment she fully embodies the version of herself she had to earn, chase, or prove, she looks around and finds that her world, quietly, powerfully, has begun to mirror her back. There is a secret that lives beneath transformation. A silent mechanism more powerful than motivation. Stronger than willpower, more potent than hustle. It is the mechanism the mind uses to teach the body what to expect, how to feel, who to become. And that secret is conscious rehearsal. The chosen woman does not wait for her life to change before she feels the change. She does not postpone the emotion she desires until her circumstances align. She understands that waiting is a form of self-abandonment. So she reverses the order. She becomes the cause, not the effect. And this begins in the theater of the inner world, where she rehearses her future with precision, with presence, with feeling, not wishful thinking, not fantasizing. Rehearsal, she closes her eyes, quiets the static, and begins to construct not just a vision, but an experience. She sees it. She feels it. She moves into it as if it is already now. As if it is already now. Hey3 walks with confidence. She steps into her, breathes as her, speaks from her chest, feels her feet on the ground. She rehearses the version of herself who no longer tolerates chaos, who speaks truth without apology, who walks away from misalignment without guilt, who receives with grace, who stands in visibility without shrinking. It doesn't care if the event is real or imagined. It only cares about repetition and emotion. And so the neurons begin to fire in new sequences. The mind-body connection begins to bridge the gap between a someday and embodiment. The nervous system, previously addicted to stress or lack or fear, begins to recalibrate around a new baseline. The felt experience of fulfillment before it arrives. This is how she bends reality. Not by force, but by frequency. Not by chasing, but by aligning. She knows that her thoughts are electric, and her emotions are magnetic. And when the two are fused in focused rehearsal, she becomes a broadcasting tower for that future. A walking resonance of what she's already practiced. She draws it not through desperation, but through coherence. This is not surface-level visualization. It is quantum programming. She does not merely watch herself from a distance. She inhabits herself. She breathes into the future, until it becomes a memory. She holds the vision so vividly that her subconscious begins to shift its loyalties. The old patterns, the old doubts, the old limits, they begin to decay from lack of attention. They are not being fed, they lose their charge. And in their place, new circuitry is born. She repeats this not once or twice, but daily. Not because she's impatient, but because she's intentional. She knows the power of rehearsal is not in forcing change, but in embodying it so thoroughly that the body believes it has already happened. And once the body believes it, it begins to act on its own. It starts reaching for aligned actions. It starts filtering reality through the lens of expansion. It starts creating opportunities that match the rehearsal. This is where the magic begins to materialize. Because now she's not just visualizing from a place of lack, she's anchoring from a place of knowing. And knowing is what collapses timelines. What she used to think would take years now rushes forward, not because time changed, but because she did. The field responds to identity, and identity is rehearsed, not found. She doesn't wait for confidence, she rehearses it. She doesn't wait for clarity, she rehearses it. She doesn't wait for abundance, she rehearses the energetic signature of already having. She doesn't wait to be loved, she rehearses being love itself. The mind gets trained, the heart stays open, the body remembers, the subconscious aligns. And now, she no longer walks into her day hoping for change. She walks into her day as the embodiment of the change already chosen. She doesn't need proof anymore. She doesn't ask for evidence before believing. She provides the emotion, and the external becomes her echo chamber. She lives from the inside out. She writes the script and rehearses until it's not acting anymore. It's being, it's wired, it's integrated. It's encoded in her cells. It's the only version of reality her system recognizes now. To walk alone without fear is not to be hardened, emotionless, or invincible. It is to be so deeply rooted in your own frequency, so familiar with your own essence, that aloneness becomes sacred. It is to no longer seek permission to exist fully, to no longer wait for approval before taking up space, to no longer outsource your power to people who haven't yet remembered their own. The chosen woman does not walk alone because she has been abandoned. She walks alone because she's been initiated. She has chosen to step beyond the noise, the programming, the old identities that no longer fit. She has chosen to tune her energy to the future she belongs to, not the past that wants to find her. And in that solitude, she doesn't find loneliness. She finds her source. She has learned to recalibrate from within, to define her identity beyond what the mirror shows, to walk in step with the quantum field, to break the addiction to fear, to master her emotions with sovereignty, to read every external moment as feedback, and to rehearse her becoming with precision. She is not led by circumstance. She is led by coherence. She is not moved by opinion. She is moved by alignment. This is the secret the world will not tell you. Power is not something you gain. It is something you remember. And fear does not dissolve through force. It dissolves through embodiment. So when she walks, even if it is alone, she does not walk empty. She walks electric. She walks with her future encoded in her stride. She walks with the universe responding to every step. She walks as the proof that the woman who owns her energy, commands her mind, and trusts her path can never truly be alone. Because the moment she remembered who she was, everything she ever needed began walking with her.